my winning lineup review for week 13 on DraftKings, and we're starting right now. Because last week was such a weird week with Thanksgiving going on. I know it was kind of everyone's process was a little bit different. Dealing with family stuff, obviously trying to get your research in for the slate, a little bit more challenging when you have more going on. But yeah, sometimes these are the best weeks, I guess. That's kind of what I found out. Had a really good week. We'll walk through kind of my teams on FanDuel. Ended up scaling up FanDuel, which we'll talk about in a second as well. Scaling back DraftKings, but we'll talk about all of that. I want to hear what was everyone's week 13 like. I think that there was kind of some mixed reviews. I threw a tweet out earlier today, and someone was I guess a little bit upset that they had some of the stud running backs and then had a poor week on DraftKings. We definitely talked about it on Sunday morning. I feel like the running back pool wasn't as strong this past week. Even like some guys at the top, like Leonard Fournette, who I liked, Saquon Barkley, like you could poke holes in guys, even all the way up there, like in those two guys in particular, but also like Le'Veon Bell. Like, yeah, the touches were probably going to be there, but you can poke holes in those guys. It felt like a weaker crowd of running back outside of Christian McCaffrey, who we got the floor game from. Two of the three guys I just mentioned were still on my team that took down a smaller field contest on FanDuel. Took down a couple smaller field contests on FanDuel, which we'll talk about. But yeah, guys, so you'll notice that no Sean Newsham with us today. No guest in general. Sean had something going on with his dog, so he couldn't make it today. But yeah, maybe I'll try and get whenever Sean's not around. I know we had Hodge talk about King of the Beach last week, which was a lot of fun. Kind of short notice for a guest this week. So solo stream today. Ownership kind of condensed around some really good plays at wide receiver, and most of them got there. But there was like a blow-up play, talking about Devontae Parker. And if you're in that mid-range wide receiver and you're kind of, let's just talk about them. So if you were deciding between Devontae Parker, Sterling Shepard, Tyler Boyd, Christian Kirk, who else was kind of in that range? I know there was a few in there that people were considering in that range. Like that was the kind of the range of wide receiver that you had to get right. Alshon, that was the other one. Yep, good call, chat. Or the wild side, Alshon. Alshon was an awesome play. And we'll talk a little bit about Alshon too. I actually didn't even play Alshon on my main team. That's why these smaller fields, like you can still make those mistakes, which is great. Anyone who thinks they had a bad week, go look at the Millie Maker bad week. I saw that on Manny's stream today. For anyone that missed Manny's stream, and by the way, I think Manny had probably one of the worst beats in the Millie Maker I've ever seen until this. So for anyone, and I was actually watching this last game because I ended up playing the Kansas City Chiefs defense on my main team. In the last, I believe it was the last play of the game or close to it. So they gave up a touchdown in garbage time, and Kansas City blocked the 2-point conversion, ran it back, and those 2 points were enough for this person to drop from first place to third place in the Millie Maker. So a $960,000 swing based on a blocked extra point or a blocked 2-point. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was something crazy after their garbage time touchdown. That's pretty insane. Just going towards like how top heavy some of these tournaments are across the industry. That's what can go wrong. That was just absolutely horrible. Literally right on your chart. Oh, I went Gesicki over Parker. My bring back Philly stacks. Yeah, so like I definitely think that Gesicki is someone that like we've talked about him before. He's gonna have some big games. He's gonna have some duds. He hasn't done enough with his target share, and I was late to the party on Devontae Parker for sure. The reason I didn't go with Gesicki on my main team is because I was just playing Jack Doyle. He was the guy that I wanted on FanDuel, but we'll get to that. All right, let's move over. We might as well let's get started here on my week. This is the contest I was referring to. It's the 30K Sunday Sweat. It's a single entry. It's 44 people. This is a really unique tournament. I don't know if there's a tournament out there like this across the industry. Actually, if you finish 18th, so like roughly 40% of the field, you basically just get your buy-in back. So it's almost like a double up with upside, like a GP, like a cash game with upside. So it's extremely flat, which is like we were just talking about that millionaire maker beat. This is what's kind of nice about this tournament is, yeah, I was like hovering around like top 5 most of the day, but like really like ended up fortunate enough to take this down, but there's not even a big difference if I like would have fallen down to second place or even third place. Like it's very, very I like the structure on this a lot. So it kind of insulates you a little bit. So this ended up being a decent chunk of my action on FanDuel. So it insulates you a little bit from like the disaster. And like we were talked about before, like survive in advance in NFL, if you don't have like that nut score at the top, sometimes it's just nice to take your buy-in back and move on. And sometimes you can kind of just luck into at least getting your money back in this tournament. So it's something that I've been kind of monitoring. I've only played this, I think, one other time all season. But I did stack it up because obviously the upside's not great in this. I did stack it up with some other tournaments as well. So for the record, this team that we'll get to didn't even sniff anything in like the Sunday Million, like literally like barely catch. So 188 won the Sunday Million. My score, obviously, 156. So that's the difference in like massive field size versus very small field size. Ended up playing the small blitz, which is, again, like if anyone's watching this and it's like, I don't want to pay $700 for an entry, like there's tons of great tournaments out there that are much lower dollar. And so this is the small blitz. It's 55 people and decent payout structure. Like, again, I actually like the more I started to look into some of the contests out on FanDuel, I think they've actually taken some strides here. And what's great is this tournament pays out almost 20% of the field, 2.5x your buy-in. Like these are the things that people aren't paying enough attention to, I think, when they're trying to choose tournaments. Like this is an awesome tournament. I think that everyone that plays on FanDuel and is playing reasonable stakes, like you should be in this. These smaller fields, like again, you can make more mistakes. We'll get to my team in a minute, but I made plenty of mistakes. So I think that's something you have to think about. And what is frustrating at times is if, yeah, you don't build enough upside, maybe you're playing the sweat, you're playing the small blitz, these smaller tournaments, you have to put it in something bigger. I had a little bit of FOMO at one point during this kind of run where basically if I would have got anything from Tyreek Hill, would have had a massive day. So this is one of the ones that I baked in for a little bit of upside. It's 900 people. Finished fourth in this, thank God. Honestly, like at that point when you don't have it in anything like super big or super large field, like I still had it in some of the really small dollar stuff, which didn't sniff, like I said, with the Sunday Million. But this is a situation where I was kind of rooting against this team a little bit because for one specific reason. So this is a single entry tournament, $100 buy-in. On FanDuel, there's, I believe, a 5 max $220 tournament with 50K up top. Same field size. I think it's like maybe just over 1,000 people, but I didn't play that. I played just this one. So in theory, and I haven't checked it, don't plan on checking it, this lineup, if it was to win this, probably would have came pretty close to winning the 2-2-2 as well. But I haven't checked. Don't plan on it. But anyways, this is when you're building an upside, I like to move down in dollar amount, move up in field size a little bit. So that, yeah, if you land on like that 1% half percentile lineup score that challenges for something in a super large field, that, yeah, you cover your upside a little bit, but your floor and most of your action, at least the way I do it, is in these smaller fields. So that's part of the reason I didn't play the 1,500 this past week on DraftKings. So they moved it up. I think there's 180 people in that now. And it's not that 180 people is bad. It's not bad at all. It's still pretty small compared to a lot of these tournaments that people are playing. For my play style, and for you guys, I mean, all you guys probably listening now know that I'm prioritizing floor in different ways, right? So running quarterbacks. I'm prioritizing running backs in general that will catch passes. On FanDuel, typically pricing is a little bit softer. And one thing in particular, too, at the tight end position, which is nice, you don't have to get quite as thin because the salaries are so much more condensed. So, like, we'll talk about that. But the difference between, like, Jack Doyle and getting up to someone like Zach Ertz or something like that in a normal week, it's normally not that hard to do. On DraftKings, getting up to someone like Travis Kelce at 7,200 or whatever he was, I mean, you just can't justify doing that in an optimal build at the tight end position, at least this past week when we had some cheaper options available. FanDuel, you can play some better plays. Typically, it is obviously there's no bonuses. I mean, it's obviously more touchdown heavy. It's not full PPR, all of that. Like, and FanDuel historically, like full disclosure, I have performed better historically on DraftKings. It's part of the reason I've been playing the 1,500 for so long. And that, I mean, obviously the 1,500 is a big part of why I've been profitable on DraftKings as well. So I think that you have to be fluid on your strategy and really kind of look at your contest selection. I think that the biggest difference between certain players being profitable and not being profitable is not being willing to kind of really dig deep into contests on each site and kind of look at your results. So it was a good week overall. But I would attribute that to having good contest selection because I made a lot of mistakes. So we'll talk about that as well. Let's see if I missed anything in the chat. I was on a little bit of a contest selection rant there, so if anyone's not interested in that, apologies, but I think it's really interesting stuff. Let's see. Oh, talking about that bad beat. Yeah, that was horrible. I was all over Alshon and Robert Woods, who still hasn't scored a touchdown yet. Yeah, man, I bet you had a great week if you had Alshon and Robert Woods. What was this buy-in? This is a 777, or sorry, this is a 750. For some reason, I thought it was a 777. Got DraftKings on my mind. So yeah, you get your dollar amount literally back if you finish in the top 40%. Kind of an interesting tournament. DK doesn't have something like this. So yeah, Flash asking in the chat if DK has something. I don't think they do. Let's see. FanDuel GPP structure smashes DKs. Primarily DK player removed a good amount of action over it. Yeah, honestly, I don't know if it used to be this way. FanDuel last year had some, I mean, they still do. They have some tournaments that are like 50% of the prize pool goes to first, and that's not ideal. But now they have these ones, like not even just this one, but talking about like even like the small blitz. Like it's just such a better payout structure overall for these ones. I think that you're always going to make more money in the long run if you don't put all your hopes and dreams into these top first, second, third place percentile finishes and all of that. I know my boy Jeff Collins disagrees with that. He thinks there's edge in some of these top heavy contest structures, which might be true for certain players. For me, it's typically not. So still kind of similar approach in this as I am on DraftKings, trying to build what I think is optimal first and then do something in lineup construction that's a little bit different, maybe a unique correlation or one key fade, one key leverage play. So that's kind of what I did here. Let's see. They still have the tournaments to attract the public with a big first place. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. A lot of people are just trying to chase that big first place prize, but in reality, the things we should be like kind of focused on too is these 2x min cashes. So exactly what Blackburn's saying in the chat, 2x min cashes. They're not on every tournament on DraftKings for sure. On FanDuel, you'll back into some of these ones that are even like 2.5x, which I mean, that's how a GPP should be. You're finishing in the top 20 percentile for a lot of these. Like you should be rewarded for that, or why aren't you just playing cash games? So let's talk about my team a little bit. So this is my main team. I'm gonna see. I wonder if you guys will be able to see this. So I went. The difference in my entire week was that I decided to move to Carson Wentz on Sunday morning. I don't know if Steve is here. Hashtag Steve in the chat. But we kind of went back and forth a little bit. And I ended up pivoting pretty late to this team. I originally had a Kyler Murray stack with, I believe it was Kyler Murray to Christian Kirk, brought it back with Robert Woods. So I still think this one ended up being a little bit better. So I went Carson Wentz to Miles Sanders. Obviously, Miles Sanders I thought was basically a lock if you wanted to get up to one expensive wide receiver, which again, this week I felt like it was a week where you could do that because there wasn't just, I don't think, an elite pool of running backs to choose from. So I opted to play Miles Sanders. He was my favorite guy by far, the cheaper end of the salary spectrum. He's 5,800 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I believe he was, let's see, 5,400 on DraftKings. So still really cheap over there. I talked about on the Sunday morning stream that I wasn't a big fan of Lindsey. I wasn't a big fan of, I mean, I think Kenyon Drake for leverage would have made some sense, but I mean, when it came down to it, there's no way I was playing that guy on my main team. Ronald Jones, again, I still have some weird biases there based on a guy that had one game where he just caught a ton of passes. So I wasn't going there. Wasn't messing around with the KC backs. I honestly, I thought Miles Sanders was an absolute stone lock this week, especially after you started building teams. It was kind of necessary. If you wanted to get up to one of the wide receivers, if you wanted to play Devontae Adams, he's the guy you had to play. So for me, he was a lock. I was in between Greg Olsen and Jack Doyle the entire morning on my running back or my tight end. Jack Doyle for me, I think because when it came down to it, I was just a little bit more comfortable with him overall. Obviously ran pretty good on that 1v1 with Olsen getting hurt. I think he had a concussion or something like that. So ended up with Jack Doyle, 6 catches for 70 and a touchdown. That's more than enough at tight end in most weeks. So the interesting part about this is, this team won, but I actually didn't have Alshon with Carson Wentz. Nelson Aguilar was like a guy that opened up the entire slate for me for the most part on FanDuel in particular. So they did have kind of a healthy wide receiver corps. Alshon Jeffrey was one of those guys popping in air yards. I believe he was in the buy low model. Don't quote me on that. But I decided to get access to Alshon through Carson Wentz. Alshon on FanDuel, for those of you that are wondering, he's 6,500. So he was a lot more expensive than even he was 500 more than Devontae Parker, like some of these some of the other guys in this range. Christian Kirk was 6,100, so he's more expensive than Christian Kirk. He was more expensive than Tyler Boyd, who I thought was one of the other guys in play in that range at 6K. So it was harder to get to Alshon in this build. As soon as I decided to move to Aguilar, it really opened things up a little bit for me. Running back, you guys won't be surprised to see Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette. I considered playing Saquon, another one of those ones like that I went back and forth on, Saquon versus Fournette, Doyle versus Olsen. The Fournette and Saquon one didn't end up mattering tons. And then catching the floor game from Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, so like that's I guess the nice thing about playing small fields. This guy's 65% owned. It doesn't completely bury you if you have a good team the rest of the way. So yeah, I mean, I still think the process was fine at Christian McCaffrey. He's 11K. I get it. He's expensive. But when the pool wasn't great at running back overall, no issues with just playing Christian McCaffrey. Still, I mean, I believe he still almost got to 100 total yards or pretty close to it. Just didn't really have that game as far as touchdowns. So this is, I mean, it's got to be the floor for CMC at this point. So no issues with that. Carson Wentz, I think that part of the reason I got on him, like, I think he was in the first look last week, actually, but obviously good spot against Miami. Miami's been like a get-right spot for so many offenses this year. Like I said, the wide receivers were back. They were healthy. And then with all this weather that was going on, all this wind in particular, I just felt more secure with Carson Wentz in a good kind of weather environment. And, I mean, I thought he was extremely underpriced as well. So, like, it's pretty similar on DraftKings as far as the scoring or as far as the pricing for quarterback. But Carson Wentz, 7,300. He was 5,800 on DraftKings. So, like, 7,300 is very, very cheap. He still was like the 10th most expensive quarterback, something like that, 12th. Like, so that to me, with that team total, like some of the things that you want to pay attention to still with all this weather, like Carson Wentz still had, outside of Patrick Mahomes, one of the highest totals on the board. So that we know is so important at the quarterback position. If I was going to make that one of my main stacks, I ended up kind of falling in love with this construction on Sunday morning, which was great. And to be completely transparent, Devontae Parker versus Christian Kirk versus Tyler Boyd versus Alshon, I mentioned, was a little bit more expensive, but versus those guys, I played Parker because I wanted to bring back. And that's, I mean, sometimes you play well, sometimes you get lucky. And falling into, and I thought a lot of those guys were really close, honestly. We talked about that on Sunday. Those were the guys that I was on in the mid-range. Parker ended up being 38.6% owned in this tournament. So, again, there's some sharper people in this tournament, right? Like CSU's in this, Chipotle Addict, all the guys, they're all in this. So, Devontae Parker at 38, I was actually a little bit nervous when I saw that ownership. But like I said, I was much more comfortable with rolling out Jack Doyle as a bring back to take care of my tight end slot than I was with playing Gesicki in this slot. So that's the construction I landed on. Obviously, the big leverage play, like I mentioned it. So I try and build what I think is optimal, and then I try and leverage from there. So my optimal team, I believe, had Wentz, and I think I went down to Devontae Adams, and then I had a different defense, something like that. I ended up deciding to, in that game with weather, trying to make a move to Tyreek Hill, who I think a lot of people, or at least I thought a lot of people would get off of. As soon as I saw he was 29% owned in this, I was a little bit nervous about that. This is supposed to be the leverage play. So again, something else I kind of got wrong this week. Like I kind of missed on ownership when it came to Tyreek Hill. I guess a little bit of a double dip here with Kansas City defense, but I liked Kansas City defense quite a bit anyways this past week. So they're one of those teams that's pressuring a ton. And let's bring you guys over the spreadsheet quickly, because I like to at least show you guys a little bit more at defense, kind of what my thought process was. So again, this is a data sheet that's available to all my Twitch subscribers for anyone that's watching this later on YouTube. And by the way, make sure you're coming and hanging out with us live next week. We record these at around 2:30 Eastern time every Monday. These reviews, obviously, we'll do the first look as well on Tuesdays, go through every position. But this is the data sheet, kind of breaking down the things that I think are really important at each position. But also, I get a bunch of awesome pressure rate data from Sports Info Solutions every single week. So this is something that I'm using pretty heavily in my decision process at the quarterback, or at the defense position. So taking a look at quarterbacks, yes, ideally you want someone that's going to take a lot of sacks. Shout out Dwayne Haskins. throw a lot of picks. That's something that I think the field is pretty aware of. Something else that the field is pretty aware of is targeting these guys that are very large favorites. So like Carolina defense, I would assume they are pretty chalky across the industry. But a big favorite that was relatively cheap was Kansas City. They don't have, I guess, when you talk like Derek Carr doesn't throw a lot of picks, doesn't take a lot of sacks. So my tiebreaker almost always at that point is going to be a couple of things. It's going to be pass attempts. So Derek Carr was projected for tied for the second most pass attempts on the slate. Pressure rate over the season, Kansas City actually is kind of middle of the pack. But if we look at over their last 4 games, Kansas City, third highest pressure rate over the last 4 games, almost second highest. So like a team that is bringing the pressure a lot more recently. So that's something that I definitely kind of want to pay attention to, and something else too. So have some offensive line grades in here, but I also want to see what that offensive line has been giving up recently for pressure. So Oakland actually has been giving up a lot more lately than they had been the entire season, which is super interesting to me. So 39% pressure rate over the last 4 games, even though they have a pretty strong offensive line. That's something that raised some flags to me. So at that price point on DraftKings, I liked them quite a bit across the industry. But on FanDuel at 4,200, they were something that just basically fit with my Tyreek Hill exposure here. So there's some duds in this team, guys. Like, it was kind of a gross week, and a lot of the chalk did really well. Kansas City defense just ended up being kind of a great differentiator for me. Hal, what's up, man? Looks like Al's just finishing up his stream. Hope you had a great stream, man. Thanks for the raid. Appreciate that. I'll move everyone back over here quickly. We actually spent a little bit more time talking about contest selection today. So it was great that I ended up scaling up FanDuel a little bit since they made my 1,500 significantly bigger on DraftKings. So I ended up playing some smaller tournaments on FanDuel. So I played the 750 Sweat, played the smaller Blitz, some of those type of tournaments. So like very small. Al, I don't know if you've seen this tournament. It's a really interesting one because it's almost like a cash game with upside. So if you finish in the top 40%, you basically get your buy-in back. But it's super flat the entire way. So I was fortunate enough to take this down. But even if you look back at it, like first place is only 4K. It's all super, super flat. So I think that these types of tournaments are awesome. We talked a little bit about how DraftKings, there's so many min cash situations where you're only 1.5xing your money. So ended up winning the small blitz as well. But the cool thing that led me to a tournament like this is basically if you were to cash this thing, $100 buy-in, $250, 2.5x your min cash. I think that this type of stuff is things that people just are not looking at enough. So yeah, super interesting stuff. We went through that a little bit, but my team overall, and I mentioned too, definitely kind of took my L, similar to Al, I think, with Nick Foles. Had some Nick Foles exposure on DraftKings, played a couple Nick Foles teams in tournaments on FanDuel as well. Just ended up kind of falling in love with Carson Wentz on Sunday morning. So the great thing about these small fields, just not mention too much of what we've already talked about, but you can make some mistakes here. Obviously, catching the floor game from Christian McCaffrey. I tried to leverage all the Devontae Adams people with the Tyreek Hill stack. That didn't work out, but Christian McCaffrey's 54% in this, but he was even more 65% in the 750. You can make some mistakes here, but I thought my correlation was good. Carson Wentz, Nelson Aguilar, Miles Sanders bring it back with Devontae Parker. Those wide receivers were tough this week. I think if you landed on the right mid-range wide receiver, i.e. Parker, you had a pretty good week. So, but yeah, overall, I think that was kind of what led me to this team in particular. Let's take a look at some other teams in this tournament. So I'm curious how other people are kind of approaching on the FanDuel side. We haven't spent enough time probably looking at FanDuel this year. So let's look at CSU's team since we got Smiz here. So Lamar ended up being super popular on kind of this FanDuel build in particular, 22%. He was around the same as Wentz, a little bit more than Wentz, but if you did that, you did have to go down. You couldn't really get in the Adams wide receiver here. So I think that people that ended up playing Lamar, very few of them ended up getting up to Adams. I kind of like what Pete did here. He ended up going up at tight end. I thought that Jack Doyle was pretty close to a lock on FanDuel at 5K, basically stone min. But Kelsey, I thought would be a little bit more unique, but I mentioned this, FanDuel, it's so much easier to get in some of these elite tight ends as well. So Kelsey, 7,100, it's only basically 2,100 more than Jack Doyle gets you Travis Kelsey. No issues with that whatsoever. He ran Lamar naked. I would assume this is probably his main tournament team. Did get Parker in, Boyd in. Boyd was one of those other guys in that mid-range that I thought was an awesome play. Miles Sanders, basically a lock, 65% in this tournament. Yeah, Le'Veon is just one of those guys that didn't quite get there, but none of these guys really did in this range anyway. So I thought Le'Veon was a fine play. 7,300 on FanDuel, basically the same price as Fournette and Saquon. I preferred those guys, but he actually ended up getting significantly more ownership around Bell than Fournette, which is interesting. I think people maybe were a little bit scared off that Tampa Bay matchup as possible. Let's see. My team was White, Adams, Allen. Interesting. That showdown slate was an interesting one too last night. So yeah, Pete ended up cashing this as well. Like I said, so like the difference between first place and 10th place, I mean, not a huge drop off in comparison to like some of the top heavy tournaments out there over on DraftKings. One of the things I did kind of want to touch on as well in terms of DraftKings, like we normally have Sean here to kind of go through what people were on in kind of the higher stakes cash game streets. I did just open up one of the double ups over on DraftKings. I think it's a $25 single entry double up. So let's take a peek at some of the ownership through here. I think that when we're looking at DraftKings, Robert Woods, we talked about him on Sunday morning. He was someone that really stood out based on price. He was 5,500. I know my face is kind of blocking that a little bit right now. But Woods in the spot against Arizona, of course, you don't see this 172-yard, 13 reception game coming, but he was an awesome play. I thought that Woods was someone that if you were just kind of looking at the right things at the wide receiver position, he's someone that really stood out. So like, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So if we go to the spreadsheet here, again, for the guys that are coming in from Al's stream, this is something that I make available to all my Twitch subscribers each and every week. We have a first look sheet, and then I update this on Sundays as well. So just looking at price here, sorting by weighted opportunity rating. Again, my favorite metric for wide receivers. It's free at airyards.com, but I bring it all together for you guys on this sheet. Robert Woods, 5,500. That's a 0.67 weighted opportunity rating against Arizona with that total. I mean, he felt like he was just so severely underpriced that I think that Robert Woods was a guy that you had to be considering in this range. Like, again, almost like polar opposites. So Alshon, 5,100 on DraftKings. He was a much better value on DraftKings than he was on FanDuel. I know he's more of a touchdown scorer anyway. But those are the guys that I was kind of looking at. So I thought Christian Kirk was an awesome play too, but Robert Woods, a little bit of savings, but obviously Alshon versus Kirk, you get a lot more savings on DraftKings. Tyler Boyd was 5,500. All these guys were in the same range. I ended up going the Aguilar route for savings because I needed it in order to make that Tyreek Hill build work. But that was kind of what I ended up landing on. Chris Conley was someone I liked earlier in the week. I get nervous with these higher ADOT guys in win situations. So yards per out run, it's another metric in here that I'm looking at. So taking out a small sample size like Andy Isabella, you're typically going to see some of the best wide receivers in the league in this category. So Tyreek Hill, that's part of the reason I thought he was such an awesome play. He was number two, or basically number one in yards per out run. And he was top 3 in weighted opportunity. So I loved that. Part of the reason we like Devontae Adams, he's $7K, so like significantly cheaper than Tyreek Hill on DraftKings. Highest weighted opportunity rating on the slate, nice total. The Giants, one of those teams that obviously is going to struggle to defend passes through the air. So I was really in on Devontae Adams on DraftKings. I think he was kind of easier to make work, especially if you went the construction on FanDuel, and you did kind of want to pay up at tight end. It was hard to get to Devontae Adams in. So let's see. What else? What have I missed in the chat here? Kobe, thanks for your tier 1, man. Appreciate that. You've been with us for 2 months. A couple new follows as well. Dick Chuck, Black, Diz Zombie. Thanks for being here, guys. Like I like to mention at least once per stream, even if you're not a subscriber, guys. More than enough just being here. You guys know I really appreciate it. So on a Monday, hopefully you had a good Monday after this Thanksgiving holiday. Thanksgiving is always a really tough week in general to kind of get through all the research, but it was a good one overall. So I'm kind of want to get a feel for at least what things were like in on the DraftKings side of things this past week. So I mentioned Woods, Devontae Parker only 14% owned on DraftKings, Alshon 18. So pretty much all these were spread. Tyler Higbee was the one, like we talked about this with Doyle on FanDuel. He was actually significantly more expensive on FanDuel as well. He's actually more expensive than Jack Doyle, I believe. He was, let's see if I can find him. 50, I think he was 55. Yeah, 5,500 on FanDuel. Stone Min on DraftKings has to be one of the first guys in, I think, whether you're a flow chart guy or not. It just basically made a lot of other things work. Christian McCaffrey, 74% owned in this massive $25 double up on the single entry side. Chiefs defense, only 6%. Miles Sanders, about 60. So pretty in line, honestly, with some of the things we were seeing over on FanDuel in terms of ownership. Let's see if we can find any. I'm curious, Christian Kirk, if anyone ended up on him in cash. I wish Sean was here. I know a lot of people were considering him as well. Auden Tate, I mean, kind of a price play. He kind of felt like the guy, like almost like the Aguilar on FanDuel. He just made your lineup work. So 3,800. Obviously, there was going to be some decent game flow there, you would think, if the Jets would have given up or put up much more of a fight, but they really didn't. So let's see. Wow, Fournette was only 7.2% owned in cash games. We'll kind of kick this to you guys in the chat. Were you guys nervous to play Fournette just based on the matchup? I honestly think that I tend to try, at least, not to pay attention only to that sort of thing. So yeah, like I said, I thought Fournette was still very much in play. Let's scroll down a little bit. Someone in the chat was looking, see if there's some Cooper Kupp love down here. Devontae Adams, 56% in this. So that was a big time fade. Sterling Shepard was the other one. I keep forgetting to mention him, but I think he was definitely in play in this range as well. Considered him on FanDuel at 4,900, like same exact price range. That was the story of the week. Let's see if we can find Tyler Boyd, 31%. So it's tight, guys. Whenever you get to this spot where it's just the difference of those like very small 1v1s, 2v2s was really the difference in this week. So was fortunate to kind of get on the right side of those. In terms of like the Millie Maker Sunday Million, like let's see who won the Sunday Million. Let's do a quick Sunday Million here. A Jared Goff stack. Jared Goff to Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee. Did not bring it back with anyone on Arizona, which is interesting. Miles Sanders, 39% owned in the Sunday Million. What was he at in the sweat, the higher stakes, smaller field? 65%. So that's the difference in stakes at times, or even in field size. So still massively chalking this. Jared Goff at 4%. Darius Geis, yeah, guy goes absolutely crazy. 2 touchdowns, 129 yards. He did it on 10 carries, only 2 receptions. So to me, that's a performance that I'm probably never going to land on. He does have a little mini stack in here as well, which I think is really sharp. So Miles Sanders, Alshon Jeffrey, Devontae Parker. This is something I was talking about last week when we were doing this show. I think one of the best things to really focus on in tournaments right now is to try and have a main stack, which he did here with Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee. You can bring it back. You cannot bring it back. Like I think that's more of a preference thing depending on the other side of the ball. But the rest of your lineup, have a small mini stack in there as well. So he did that with Sanders, Jeffrey, and Parker. I think that's an amazing way to go about construction, because then you're still, the rest of your team is filling out with some of the best plays. So for me, Christian McCaffrey would definitely kind of hit that mark as well. So this guy wins 300K, still plays Christian McCaffrey in his floor game. Pittsburgh Steelers, pretty high owned defense to be in this. I thought Pittsburgh was an awesome play. Pittsburgh was one of the ones in this salary range that I was considering. Obviously, with the concessions I made to go down to Aguilar instead of one of those other mid-range wide receivers, I had the salary to get up to Tyreek and Chiefs. I love the Chiefs defense, but I thought Pittsburgh was super interesting as well. Pittsburgh, again, I should give you guys a little bit more context since it's just me today. So bringing it back to the sheet, Pittsburgh, 3,500 on DraftKings, really expensive. On FanDuel, they're only 3,700. Again, if we're just looking at pressure rate over the last 4 games, they're a team that pressures all season. We know that. But highest pressure rate of any team on the slate over the last 4 games, playing against Cleveland, who's had some offensive line struggles this year. They haven't been giving up as much pressure, which is, I guess, notable. But Baker, I mean, there was going to be, I think that it was a decent spot, especially at that price. When you're looking at price on FanDuel, it was like basically Cincinnati was there. And you're at the Washington, Oakland, Washington side. I guess I didn't love any of those spots for pressure outside of maybe going down to Pittsburgh. So I thought that they were they were the interesting ones. So I think that was really sharp what he did here on this this Sunday Million team. Like the construction overall, like I said. So I thought that was a really interesting one to look at. We talked a little bit about the Millie Maker bad beat. That was just absolutely crazy. Rope Top, thanks for your Twitch Prime, man. Always want to remind you guys too, if anyone's watching this on YouTube later, come hang out with us on stream. But if you have an Amazon Prime account, you automatically have access to a free Twitch Prime subscription. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. Whether it's me, whether it's Al, it's the best way to support what we're trying to do here for free. If you want to learn more about how to be a profitable DFS player and get better at betting, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right-hand corner so you don't miss anything. If you're looking to take your game to that next level, come hang out with us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. I'll see you guys on the next live stream.